I just lived through something I never imagined would happen on my own property. The homeowners association leader blocked my entire driveway with her vehicle and basically told me to deal with the situation. Her reasoning? She claimed my private driveway qualified as shared community property. What she didn't anticipate was that I'd involve law enforcement and her entire scheme would collapse with witnesses present. Let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Holt Travis, and I run a modest farming operation. The spread isn't what you'd call extensive anymore, just sufficient acreage to keep me occupied and my thoughts settled. I maintain a small cattle herd, cultivate a cornfield that turns amber each autumn, and work out of a barn filled with the scent of straw and decades of history. 4 generations of my family have tended this soil. My great-grandfather cultivated these fields behind a mule. These days I operate a John Deere that rivals a compact vehicle in size. The machinery runs loud while I prefer keeping things understated. My philosophy centers on straightforward principles: work diligently, treat others with respect, and avoid creating conflicts. However, when conflict arrives uninvited, you address it directly with whatever resources you possess. Sometimes that means a respectful conversation. Other occasions call for 12 tons of American-made machinery. On that specific Tuesday morning, the problem didn't announce itself politely. It simply parked directly across my drive, creating a complete obstruction. A pristine white luxury vehicle sat there, the type that's never encountered actual mud. It gleamed under the sunrise like polished porcelain. Tucked beneath the windshield wiper sat a folded paper. My wife Lisa spotted it initially through our kitchen window. She serves as my foundation, my organizer, my partner in everything. She manages our finances, coordinates logistics, handles communications. She perceives approaching difficulties long before I sense any threat. "Holt," she called out, her tone measured but carrying tension like a stretched cable. "You should look at this." I stepped onto the porch, cleaning oil from my palms with a worn cloth. The morning air carried the aroma of moist earth and freshly trimmed grass. That white vehicle looked like a wound against the natural landscape. I walked down the gravel path, my work boots crunching with each step. The message was scrawled in aggressive, sharp handwriting on absurdly expensive stationery. It read, "We must discuss the proposed community thoroughfare. I'll return at midday. Stay put." Signed by Karen Tyson, HOA president. I read it multiple times. Community thoroughfare. That was elaborate terminology for a property easement. A pathway for the upcoming subdivision they planned behind my land. A shortcut benefiting them, a gash through my prime grazing land for me. We'd been receiving correspondence. We'd been disregarding it. I crumpled the paper in my fist. Stay put. The presumption of it settled in my stomach like a frozen stone. I had livestock feed to collect from town. The cattle wouldn't accommodate Karen Tyson's schedule. I glanced at the vehicle, then toward my barn. Inside waited my tractor, Old Faithful green. It wasn't merely equipment. It represented a resolution, a substantial, weighty, powerful resolution. I turned and headed toward the barn. Lisa stood on the porch gripping a coffee cup. She understands my expressions. She interprets me better than any written page. She didn't say don't. She simply sipped her coffee slowly and asked, "The birdhouse camera is operational, correct?" I nodded. I rang her doorbell. No response. I contacted a towing service. "HOA matter, we can't intervene," the operator explained. I stood in the driveway and called toward her window. "Move your vehicle, Karen." Curtains shifted slightly. Neighbor Ed emerged from his house, coffee raised in greeting. Mark from down the street drifted toward my property line, silent as a scarecrow. "Planning to tow or bulldoze?" he inquired. "Neither," I responded. "I'm removing the obstruction courteously." Lisa checked the birdhouse camera and grinned. "It's recording," she confirmed. "So proceed." The tractor engine rumbled to life with a deep, throaty sound that dispersed dust from the overhead beams. It's the sound of raw capability, a commitment to work completion. I reversed it into the yard, the massive tires creating deep impressions in the yielding earth. I drove it directly to Karen Tyson's immaculate vehicle. Her car's bumper reached approximately halfway up my front tire. It appeared toy-like in comparison. I lowered the front loader's pallet forks slowly, deliberately. I've hoisted 3-ton hay bundles, extracted oak stumps from hardened ground, relocated boulders comparable to compact cars. A 2-ton vehicle was simply a matter of proper balance. I positioned the forks beneath the frame just past the front axle. I exercised care. I didn't want paint damage. Not yet, anyway. I simply wanted relocation. Mark leaned against the fence and gave me a subtle 2-finger gesture. Tiny increments, gentle pressure. I controlled the lever carefully. The forks touched the frame lightly. Mark mentioned wheel chocks. I maintained dual contact points on the controls. The vehicle sighed from across the street. A voice commented, "He won't actually do it." Another replied, "$5 says he does." Lisa called steadily as always. "Slow, Holt." "Slow's my only speed," I responded. The front elevated. The street hushed. Window blinds snapped shut. The tractor growled. With gentle hydraulic lever pressure, the vehicle's front lifted from the ground. It rose smoothly, quietly, except for metal's low groan. The rear wheels remained on gravel, but the front suspended 4 feet high. It looked absurd, like a begging dog. I engaged the tractor's gear and began moving forward, not rapidly, just a slow, steady progression toward the drainage channel running beside the road. The channel measured roughly 5 feet deep, filled with tall grass and previous year's cattails. The bottom held significant mud. I maneuvered the tractor to the road's edge, adjusted positioning precisely, and lowered the forks. The vehicle settled with a soft tire whoosh into grass, then a muddy impact as the frame contacted the embankment. Then I nudged the lever again, just slightly. The vehicle slid the remaining distance. It rolled and tilted forward, nose first. Call it a farm-style repositioning. It simply rested there, nose down in mud, its rear elevated at an unusual angle. It resembled a pig rooting for truffles. I reversed the tractor, raised the forks, and returned it to the barn. I parked, shut down the engine, and the sudden silence felt magnificent. I walked back to the house. Lisa stood on the porch, phone in hand, a slight smile crossing her lips. "Neighbor Ed just drove past," she reported. "He slowed, reversed, then drove off laughing so forcefully I thought his truck would vibrate apart." She displayed her phone. "The birdhouse captured excellent footage. Crystal clear." I extracted the crumpled note from my pocket and smoothed it on the porch railing. "Stay put," I read aloud. I looked at the vehicle, stuck and powerless in the channel. A problem addressed, or so I believed. I assumed she'd comprehend the message. I assumed incorrectly. This wasn't a problem's conclusion. It marked a conflict's beginning, and I had just initiated hostilities with a 12-ton instrument. The genuine trouble I was about to discover wasn't stuck in the ditch. It was just commencing. The footage reached the internet before Karen Tyson's recovery vehicle even showed up. Neighbor Ed, resourceful as always, had dashboard recording equipment. He'd transmitted the footage to his son, who uploaded it with the caption, "Farmer takes on HOA leader." It spread rapidly. By evening, the clip had exploded online, showing me maneuvering her luxury vehicle in slow, precise movements into the drainage channel. The responses overwhelmingly supported my actions. "That's not merely a tractor, that's a precision-calibrated fairness enforcement mechanism," someone commented. Another added, "He didn't even damage the paint." Flawless execution, flawless justice. Lisa read them aloud while preparing dinner, laughing. Momentarily, it felt like triumph. We'd confronted intimidation, and the world applauded. But I've accumulated enough experience to recognize that intimidators, particularly wealthy and influential ones, don't simply retreat when humiliated. They become quiet. They become calculated. Then they retaliate. The applause from internet strangers diminishes, but your adversary remains in proximity. The initial official correspondence arrived 2 days afterward. It came through certified delivery, a thick cream-colored envelope that felt significant and carried a faint, expensive fragrance. It originated from the Briarwood Estates Homeowners Association, signed by Karen Tyson personally. Lisa opened it with a letter opener, her movements exact. She read it, and her smile disappeared. "Well," she stated, her voice flat. "Here it comes." The letter represented a masterwork of petty authoritarianism. It contained a penalty list. The first demanded $500 for unauthorized agricultural equipment operation on a residential thoroughfare. My driveway, present for a century, now qualified as a residential thoroughfare. The second penalty demanded $1,000 for unapproved community landscape modification. That referenced the tire marks her vehicle created sliding into the channel. The third was genuinely shocking: $2,000 for creating a public disturbance and safety threat, citing the viral footage as evidence of my aggressive and erratic conduct. I stared at the document. It was preposterous, like receiving a citation from the predator for damaging his teeth on your livestock. "She can't be serious," I said. Lisa was already at her computer accessing the HOA regulations and governing documents. She's the investigator, the planner. I provide the force. She provides the intelligence. We function effectively together. "Oh, she's completely serious, Holt," Lisa said, her fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. "The regulations are composed so ambiguously, she can construe them virtually any direction she chooses. Examine this section. The Architectural Oversight Committee maintains authority to impose penalties for any conduct deemed harmful to the visual unity of the community. That's essentially unlimited authority to do whatever she desires. The visual unity of the community. My farm, present decades before Briarwood Estates existed even as a concept on a developer's proposal, now threatened their unity." The following day, another letter arrived. This one wasn't a penalty. It was a formal ultimatum. That afternoon, she marched down my gravel path like she possessed the property. "Sign the survey authorization, Holt," she stated, voice artificially sweet with underlying malice. "Or the county will authorize it for you." I held the document between two fingers. "Are you practicing law without proper licensing now?" She smiled thinly. "I practice achieving victory." "People like you capitulate," she said. "I simply determine when." Lisa stepped onto the porch, phone raised. Karen tilted her head toward the camera. "Record this," she said. "This marks the day he discovered who controls Briarwood." "The cattle," I said. "They control Briarwood." Her smile fractured. Under her breath. "You'll regret not selling cheaply." Lisa's camera captured it. The document stated that due to my demonstrated antagonism and the apparent necessity for alternate access for emergency response, the HOA would petition the county to survey my property and pursue a utility access easement, using phrases like public welfare and suggesting eminent domain if I resisted. The county would need to authorize that. Not Karen, not the HOA. But the message was transparent. "We're acquiring your land regardless of your opposition." This was her ultimate objective. The blocked driveway, the penalties, all constituted pretext, a method to manufacture justification for the easement she'd wanted from the beginning. She was constructing a documentary record to portray me as an unreasonable obstacle requiring resolution, and the resolution conveniently meant a road through my pasture that would generate her and her developer associates substantial profit. The emails commenced that evening. They originated from Karen's official HOA email address. The initial one was patronizing. "Mr. Travis, I'm willing to be magnanimous here. If you consent to a meeting discussing the easement, I might reconsider these regrettable but required penalties." I didn't respond. An hour afterward, another arrived. "Your non-response is being documented. A cooperative disposition would serve your interests." Then they became hostile. She accused me of diminishing property values. She threatened legal proceedings that would entangle your farm in litigation for years. She even attached a grainy photograph of my barn. Subject line: "That's an attractive old barn. It would be unfortunate if it failed a fire safety inspection." She copied her insurance provider and implied her damaged vehicle would require complete replacement. It was intimidation, transparent and direct. Lisa printed every single email and filed them in an expanding folder labeled KAREN. I'm a patient individual. I can wait for crops to mature. I can wait for weather to clear. My patience runs deep, but it has boundaries. Karen Tyson was systematically, persistently pressuring me. She wasn't merely attempting to claim a portion of my property anymore. She was attempting to break me, to submerge me in documentation and threats until I surrendered. I stood on my porch that evening, observing the dark fields my family had invested their labor and dedication into. The land was quiet, tranquil, but conflict had been declared against it, against us. The penalties, the legal threats, the intimidation, all constituted merely the opening assault. I knew with certainty settling deep in my core that she wouldn't cease with correspondence and emails. Her variety of poison always spreads. The paper cuts were merely the beginning. The genuine pain awaited. The first actual assault arrived without warning, under darkness, without moonlight. I awakened around 3 a.m, sensing something was wrong. It wasn't sound that roused me, it was stillness. The familiar low hum of the large diesel tank's transfer pump, scheduled to refill the main tractor, was silent. It should have been operating. I pulled on my boots and a jacket and grabbed the heavy flashlight from beside the door. The outside air was cold and thick with moisture. As I rounded the barn's corner, the flashlight beam revealed it. The hose from the main storage tank lay on the ground, a dark wet stain spreading in the dirt surrounding it. The padlock securing the tank valve was missing, severed with bolt cutters. I checked the gauge. The tank, which contained 500 gallons of diesel fuel, was nearly depleted. They hadn't taken just a small amount. They had drained it. A cold fury, different from the hot anger I'd experienced over the vehicle, washed over me. This exceeded an inconvenience. This was a direct assault on my livelihood. That fuel represented thousands of dollars. But beyond that, it was the farm's lifeblood. Without it, the tractor couldn't operate. The fields couldn't be worked, and the work couldn't be completed. This wasn't petty harassment anymore. This was sabotage. I swept the flashlight beam across the ground, searching for anything, and I discovered it. Next to the dark puddle of spilled fuel was a single distinct boot print in the soft mud. It was a work boot, an inexpensive brand with a distinctive star pattern on the sole. It wasn't my size. I photographed it with my phone. Evidence. Lisa was already awake when I returned to the house, a concerned expression on her face. I didn't need to speak. She observed the grim set of my jaw. I showed her the photograph. They drained the main tank, I said. Her hand covered her mouth. Holt, we must contact the sheriff. I shook my head. And report what? That someone stole my fuel? They'll document a report and we'll never hear anything further. There's no evidence connecting her. The following morning, the complete extent of the damage became apparent. As I went to release the cattle into the rear 40-acre pasture, I discovered the gate. It wasn't open, it was severed. 3 clean cuts through the heavy gauge wire fencing directly adjacent to the gate post. The gate itself hung by one hinge and the cattle had disappeared. A wave of panic, cold and piercing, struck me. My herd wasn't extensive, but they were my responsibility. And now they were scattered, wandering somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, potentially on the main highway. The subsequent 2 hours were a frantic blur. I contacted neighbor Ed, his wife Sharon, and several other reliable people. It was a small community of farmers on the subdivision's periphery, and we supported each other. We dispersed in our trucks, driving the local roads, flashlights sweeping the fields. We located them, fortunately. Some were grazing peacefully in a neighbor's alfalfa field. 6 had wandered toward the highway, and we managed to redirect them just as morning traffic was beginning. It was a nightmare. Getting them all collected and guided back through the damaged gate consumed the entire morning. By the time the final cow was back in the pasture and I'd repaired the fence with spare wire, the sun was high overhead. I was exhausted, muddy, and operating on pure adrenaline and rage. This was a calculated act of malice. They could have simply left the gate open. Severing the fence was intended to cause maximum damage, to endanger my animals, to create chaos. It was Karen's message, loud and unmistakable. I can reach you. I can harm you. I can destroy what you value. I stood there observing the repaired fence, the weary cattle, the empty fuel tank, the penalties I could contest, the emails I could disregard. But this was different. This was a boundary. You don't interfere with a person's family, and you don't interfere with their animals. They had crossed that boundary. Back at the house, Lisa had been productive. She'd documented everything. Photographs of the broken lock, the severed fence, the boot print. She'd calculated the cost of the stolen fuel and the time lost. She was constructing a case element by element. She's attempting to establish a pattern, Lisa said, her voice steely. She wants it to appear like you're a negligent farmer, that your property represents a hazard. First, the dangerous tractor, now loose cattle. It all supports her narrative for the easement. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the anger draining from me, leaving behind a hard, cold determination. I had been reacting. The tractor in the channel was a reaction. That was finished now. The time for reacting was concluded. It was time to begin planning. It was time to establish a trap. She wants conflict, Lisa, I said, my voice low. Fine, she has it. But we're going to conduct it on our conditions, on our territory. My mind was already working, considering cameras and traps and the type of quiet, patient strategy that a farmer understands best. She had awakened the sleeping dog. Now she would have to handle the bite. The kitchen table became our strategic center. Lisa spread out a satellite map of our property, obtained from the county assessor's office. We had 160 acres, a perfect square. Our house and barns were near the road, but the land extended back considerably. It was too extensive to patrol, too extensive to monitor simultaneously. We can't be everywhere, I said, tracing the property line with my finger. So we must be intelligent. We must make them approach us to a location we control. Lisa nodded, tapping a pen on the map. The fuel tanks, the main gate. Those are the two locations they've targeted. They're predictable. They'll return to do more of the same to strengthen the pattern. She was correct. Intimidators are rarely inventive. They persist with what succeeds. My responsibility was to ensure that this time what succeeded for them would succeed for me. The next day, I drove into town, but I didn't visit the feed store. I went to a specialty electronics shop and a hunting supply store. My shopping list was unusual for a farmer. 4 high-definition game cameras, motion-activated with night vision capability. 2 tiny GPS trackers small enough to conceal on a tractor, and the centerpiece of my plan, a special invisible ultraviolet dye designed for detecting machinery leaks. It was harmless, but under blacklight it glowed a brilliant, unmistakable blue. It was designed to identify thieves. I also purchased 3 pre-constructed birdhouses. They appeared ordinary, rustic, the type you'd observe on any farm. But I spent that afternoon in my workshop, carefully modifying them. I drilled a tiny hole in each front just below the main opening and installed a small wireless camera inside. They had independent battery packs and would stream footage directly to an application on Lisa's phone. They were my secret surveillance. I spent the following 2 days establishing my traps. It was demanding work, but it was satisfying. It felt beneficial to be taking action, to be assuming control. I positioned 1 birdhouse camera on a pole overlooking the main driveway and front gate. Another went on the barn side with a perfect view of the fuel tanks. The final one I placed on an old oak tree at the rear pasture's edge, aimed at the fence section they had severed. The game cameras I placed in less conspicuous spots, concealed in bushes covering the other barn approaches. Then came the GPS trackers. I tucked one deep into my main tractor's engine compartment and the other underneath my flatbed trailer's frame. If they attempted to steal my equipment, I'd know exactly where it went. The final piece of the trap was the dye. I didn't put it in the main diesel tank. That remained mostly empty. Instead, I used the smaller 55-gallon drum we used for the utility vehicle. I filled it with fresh diesel, and then I added the entire bottle of UV dye. I mixed it in completely. Then I left the cap slightly loose and put a brand new, inexpensive padlock on the valve, one that could be severed with small bolt cutters. It was bait, a nice full tank of fuel seemingly less protected than the main one. It was an invitation. I felt a twinge of something, a nagging question in the back of my mind. How far is too far? I was actively luring someone into a trap. But then I thought of my cattle wandering on a dark highway and the twinge disappeared. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting my home. With everything in position, all we could do was wait. The waiting was the most difficult part. Every night we'd sit in the living room, the television on low, but our real attention was on Lisa's tablet, which displayed the live feeds from the 4 cameras. Every shadow that moved, every rustle of leaves in the wind made my heart jump. The first night, nothing. The second night, A deer wandered past the barn, triggering the motion sensor and giving us a minor heart attack. The third night it rained, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the whole world gray and quiet. It felt like nothing would ever happen. I was starting to think I'd miscalculated, that they had completed their damage and moved on. Maybe the sabotage was a single occurrence. Lisa, ever the patient one, put a hand on my arm. "They'll return, Holt. People like Karen don't surrender that easily. She's just waiting for you to lower your defenses." As usual, she was correct. It was just after midnight on the fourth night when the small notification icon appeared on her tablet. A chime, soft but sharp in the quiet house. It was from the camera on the barn, the one directed at the fuel tanks. We both leaned in, our breath held tight. The night vision view was grainy, black and white, but the image was unmistakable. A lone figure dressed in dark clothes and a hooded sweatshirt was moving stealthily toward the smaller fuel drum. He was carrying bolt cutters and a long coiled siphon hose. He paused, looked around, and then went to work on the inexpensive padlock. It snapped with a dull click. The rat had discovered the cheese. Now we just had to observe if he was foolish enough to consume it. I didn't contact the sheriff, not yet. This had to be handled my way. I grabbed the large 6L flashlight, the one that feels like a police baton, and a small, powerful UV flashlight I purchased with the dye. I slipped out the back door, moving silently through the wet grass. The drizzle had stopped, but the air was thick and heavy. I didn't turn on my lights. I knew my land's layout by heart. I circled around the barn's rear, approaching behind him. He was completely focused on his task. The siphon hose already in the drum, the other end feeding into a row of plastic gas containers in the back of a beat-up dark-colored pickup truck I didn't recognize. The sound of the gurgling diesel fuel was the only noise in the night. I was approximately 10 feet away when he finished filling the last container. He pulled the hose from the drum and a little fuel splashed out, splashing onto his hands and his jacket cuffs. He didn't seem to notice. He started securing the caps back on the containers, preparing to depart. That's when I made my move. I stepped out from behind the barn and hit him with the main beam of the flashlight. The sudden intense blast of light made him cry out and throw his hands up to shield his eyes. "Looking for something?" I asked, my voice low and calm. He was just a man, not a monster. He looked to be in his 40s, thin and wiry, with a nervous energy about him. He was wearing inexpensive work boots. I'd bet my farm the sole had a star pattern on it. I wasn't doing anything," he stammered, blinking in the bright light. "I'm just leaving." "You're leaving with about 30 gallons of my fuel," I said, taking another step closer. He darted left, boots skidding in the slick ground. I intercepted him. "Keys," I said. "Truck keys now." He tried to shoulder past me. I held firm and he bounced back. "You can't prove anything," Jerry said. I was reading the name stitched on his jacket pocket. "I don't need to prove you're incompetent at this," I said. "I just need to prove who sent you." His eyes flicked toward the road like a dog glancing at a master who wasn't present. That told me more than any confession. "That's my diesel. Not a buffet." He started to back away, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. "You can't prove anything," he spat, attempting to sound tough, but his voice cracked. That's when I switched flashlights. I turned off the large flashlight, plunging us back into near darkness for a second, and then I activated the small UV light. I directed the beam at his hands. They illuminated as if they were on fire. A brilliant ghostly electric blue. The splashes on his jacket cuffs glowed. The tip of the siphon hose glowed. The puddle on the ground glowed. He looked down at his own hands, his mouth falling open in disbelief. He was caught, literally blue-handed. I call it justice by illumination. For a second, he froze. Then panic took over. He spun around and tried to run, but he was panicked and the ground was slick with mud and spilled diesel. He slipped, scrambled to his feet, and I was on him. I'm not a young man, but I'm strong. Years of farm work have ensured that. I didn't strike him. I just grabbed him by the front of his jacket, spun him around, and pinned him against the barn's side. He struggled for a moment, then went limp, breathing hard. The fight was gone. He was just a scared man who'd been caught doing something foolish. "It wasn't my idea," he gasped, his eyes wide with fear. "I swear it wasn't my idea. She paid me to do it. She made me do it." He was talking rapidly, the words tumbling out. He was ready to betray whoever sent him for the slightest chance of getting out of this. I had him. I had my proof. But his desperate confession was more than just an admission of guilt. It was the key. It was the first thread I could pull that I knew would lead all the way back to Karen Tyson and unravel her entire scheme. I didn't release him. I walked him into the barn, sat him down on an old wooden crate, and stood in front of him, my arms crossed. The large barn doors were closed. It was just the two of us, surrounded by the smell of hay and old wood. The man, who told me his name was Jerry, wouldn't look me in the eye. He just stared at his glowing blue hands. Lisa came in a moment later. She didn't say a word to him. She just set a small digital voice recorder on a nearby workbench and pressed the record button. A tiny red light blinked on. Jerry's eyes flicked toward it, and he seemed to shrink even smaller. "Let's start from the beginning, Jerry," I said, my voice even. "Who is she?" He hesitated for a second. Then it all came pouring out. He was a local handyman struggling to make ends meet. Karen Tyson had hired him a few weeks ago for some work at her house. Then she'd offered him cash for another job, an off-the-books job. He admitted to everything. He told us how Karen had given him bolt cutters and paid him $500 to drain my fuel tank the first time. He said she was the one who instructed him to sever the fence to make it appear like my cattle escaped on their own. She wanted to create a record of problems to build a case against me with the county. "She said you were a stubborn old man who was blocking progress," Jerry mumbled. "She said if we made life hard enough for you, you'd sell the easement for cheap just to make it all stop." He described her plan in detail. She wanted the access road for a new luxury housing development. The developer was a company called Oak Ridge Estates, and they were paying her a substantial consulting fee to secure the right-of-way. The HOA was just her weapon, the penalties and violations her ammunition. Lisa listened intently, taking notes. When he was done talking, she spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and clear. "Jerry, you're in substantial trouble. Grand theft, felony vandalism, trespassing. You could face imprisonment for this." Jerry flinched. "But," Lisa continued, "we're not unreasonable people. We don't want to ruin your life. We want the person who put you up to this." She slid a piece of paper and a pen across the workbench. "I've written out a statement with everything you just told us. I want you to read it, and if it's accurate, I want you to sign it. You do that and we'll tell the sheriff you cooperated fully. You don't. And I'm calling him right now and sending him the video of you stealing my husband's fuel." It was a simple choice. Take the fall alone, or take Karen down with him. I took his keys, rolled his beat-up truck into the equipment bay, and secured the bay door with a chain. "Evidence," I said. He departed on foot. After Jerry left, walking quickly down the dark road with a warning to never approach my property again, Lisa and I went back to the house. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a sense of grim purpose. We had the confession. We had the video. But we knew it wasn't sufficient. A signed statement from a caught thief against a respected community leader like Karen Tyson. It would be his word against hers, and she would demolish him in court. "We need more," Lisa said, already back at her computer. "We need a paper trail. We need to connect Karen directly to this developer, Oak Ridge Estates." And so the investigation began. Lisa, with her methodical brilliance, started digging. She spent hours online searching county records, business filings, and property deeds. I made coffee and looked over her shoulder, amazed at how she could navigate the maze of digital bureaucracy. The first crack appeared around 2 in the morning. Lisa was cross-referencing the HOA's publicly posted meeting minutes with her own records. "That's peculiar," she murmured. "The HOA website says they held a special board meeting 3 weeks ago. The minutes show they voted to authorize legal action to secure an easement on our property." I remembered that night clearly. "There was no meeting," I said. "Neighbor Ed is on the board. He would have informed us." Lisa's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Exactly. Ed said the last meeting was 2 months ago." She pulled up the document. The minutes were detailed, formal, and completely fabricated. Karen had falsified official records to give herself the authority to sue us. The real breakthrough, the piece that tied it all together, came just before dawn. Lisa had been investigating the shell company, Oak Ridge Estates. It was registered in another state, designed to be anonymous. But she found one loose thread. A filing document for the company listed a registered agent, the person legally responsible for receiving paperwork. The name on the form was not Karen Tyson. It was a name I didn't recognize, Karen Miller. Miller? I asked, rubbing my tired eyes. Lisa looked at me, a grim smile on her face. I wondered about that too, she said. She opened a new browser tab and typed Karen Tyson genealogy into the search bar. A few clicks later, she found it. A wedding announcement from a local newspaper 20 years ago. The bride's name was Karen Miller. It was her maiden name. She had used her maiden name to register the shell company that was paying her to force an easement through our land. She was the developer. The whole thing was a self-serving criminal enterprise. We had her. We had the confession, the videos, the fake minutes, and now the money trail. The trap had been sprung and the queen rat had left her name all over the cheese. We thought we had a few days to plan our next move, to take our evidence to the sheriff. We were wrong. Karen must have realized her handyman, Jerry, had gone silent. She must have suspected he'd been caught, because her next move wasn't petty. It was desperate. The storm hit the following night. A genuine Midwestern behemoth rolled in with biblical fury. Wind howled, windows rattled, rain fell in sheets. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. Lisa lit a few oil lamps, their soft glow casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It was in the middle of a deafening clap of thunder that Lisa's phone, which she'd been keeping charged with a battery pack, chimed. It was another motion alert. This one was from the camera on the oak tree overlooking the far end of the property. We huddled around the small screen. The night vision was struggling against the sheeting rain, but the image was undeniable. A beat-up dark-colored pickup truck, the same one Jerry had used, was at our main gate. But this time 2 men got out. They weren't trying to be quiet. One of them had a heavy chain and was wrapping it around the gate. The other was getting back in the truck. They were going to ram it or pull it right off its hinges. These weren't vandals sent to cause a nuisance. This was a brute force assault. They're here to retrieve Jerry's truck and destroy the cameras. Eliminate the evidence before we can hand it over. They're here to get it out of the barn before we can give it to the authorities. Lisa was already dialing emergency services. The lines are down, she said, her voice strained. The storm must have knocked out the tower. We were on our own. A cold dread mixed with white-hot anger filled my chest. This was my home. My family was here. I would not let them break in. Stay here. Lock the doors. If they get past me, activate the panic horn and stay in the pantry, I told Lisa. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight and my keys and went out the back door into the roaring storm. The rain was so heavy it was like walking through a waterfall. I wasn't going for my pickup. I was going for the one thing on this farm bigger and tougher than their truck. I was going for Old Faithful Green. The tractor started with a reassuring roar, its engine a beastly growl against the thunder. Its headlights cut through the darkness and the rain, 2 powerful beams of light. I didn't bother with the front gate. I knew my own land. I drove straight through the side fence, the wires screaming and snapping as the massive machine plowed through without even slowing down. I rumbled out onto the main driveway just as they got the gate open. Lightning ripped the sky open. For a split second I saw their faces, wide, mean, scared. The chain snapped off the hinge and whipped the hood of their truck. They floored it. I swung left and the rear tire slid. If they double back, I called toward the house. No answer. Lines were dead. Wind was a scream. From the porch, Lisa flashed the handheld light twice. I see you. I'm here. The truck fishtailed at the equipment shed and clipped my harrow, sparks skittering like fireflies. I dropped the bucket and herded them off the hard pack toward the pond. Inch by wet inch they saw me then, the tractor. A massive roaring monster emerging from the darkness and the storm, its lights blinding them. They panicked. The driver slammed their truck into reverse, tires spinning in the mud, and the man on foot scrambled to get back in. They weren't here for a confrontation with a 12-ton machine. They tried to turn around in the narrow space between the barn and the equipment shed, but the ground was a sea of mud. Their tires found no purchase. I just kept advancing, slow and steady like death itself. I didn't have to hit them. I just had to herd them. Truth is, I'd rather repair a fence than a person. I knew exactly where I was pushing them, toward the east side of the property where the ground sloped down sharply toward the large irrigation pond. The driver, in his terror, made a fatal mistake. He gunned the engine, trying to swing the truck's rear end around. The truck fishtailed wildly in the slick mud. For a moment, it looked like he might get control. But then the back wheel slid off the edge of the graded path. The truck tilted. hung there for a heart-stopping second, and then slid, slowly at first, then all at once down the muddy embankment and into the pond. It came to rest with a great splash, its nose buried deep in the murky water and its tail sticking up in the air, its headlights creating two ghostly wavering columns of light beneath the surface. The storm raged on. I stopped the tractor at the edge of the pond and shone my lights on the half-submerged truck. The two men were scrambling out of the passenger side window, soaked and sputtering. They were large guys, much larger than Jerry, but the fight was completely out of them. They looked terrified. I just sat there in the tractor's cab high above them, watching. The rain started to lessen, the thunder moving off into the distance. I got out of the tractor and walked to the edge of the water. One of the men was clinging to the side of the truck bed. The other was wading through the waist-deep water toward the bank. As he got closer, I saw something float out of the cab and bob on the surface. Two small dark rectangles, burner phones. I waded into the cold water without a second thought and snatched them up before they could sink. I held them up. The two intruders just stared at me, their faces pale in the tractor's headlights. They knew what I had. More evidence, more proof. The storm was ending, and so was Karen Tyson's desperate plan. I had her thugs. I had their phones. And I had their truck slowly drowning in my pond. The sheriff finally arrived an hour later, after the storm had passed and the phone lines were back up. He looked at the scene, the two soaked and shivering men sitting on the ground in handcuffs, the pickup truck protruding from the pond, and me standing there covered in mud, and just shook his head. "Holt," Sheriff Miller said, his voice weary. "I should have known that when dispatch said there was a minor traffic incident at your place, it would look like this." I handed him the two burner phones sealed in a plastic bag. I gave him Jerry's signed confession and a thumb drive with all the video files. Lisa had already printed out the fake HOA minutes and the corporate filings for Oak Ridge Estates, all neatly organized in a binder. We gave him everything. I handed over Jerry's keys and the chain we'd used on the bay door. He took our statements and said, "For now, this is a report. Whether it's criminal mischief or lawful defense depends on your proof," he added. "Don't move that truck or the phones on your own. Secure it. We'll process it." He spent a long time looking through it all, his expression growing grimmer with each page. He looked at the confession, then at the two men in the back of his patrol car. "These two aren't talking," he said, "but I have a feeling these phones will." The next 2 days were quiet, the calm before the final storm. The sheriff's department impounded the pickup from the pond and took our evidence. Lisa and I knew we had done all we could. Now it was a matter of waiting for the legal system to work. But we also knew we had one more card to play. The HOA had a regularly scheduled monthly meeting that Friday night. It was usually a dull affair attended by a handful of retirees complaining about lawn ornaments. But we knew Karen would be there. She would have to be to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. We decided this was where it had to end, not in a quiet courtroom months from now, but in public in front of the very people she had lorded her power over. We spent the day making calls, talking to our neighbors. We spoke to neighbor Ed and his wife Sharon. We talked to the woman Karen had fined for planting the wrong color of petunias. We talked to the family she'd threatened over the height of their children's swing set. We didn't tell them everything, just that we had something important to say at the meeting and that we would appreciate their support. Friday night, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had gotten out. People were standing along the walls. Karen Tyson was at the front of the room looking polished and confident, but I could see a faint tension around her eyes. She clearly wasn't expecting this kind of turnout. She tried to run the meeting as usual, talking about budgets and landscaping contracts, but the air in the room was thick with anticipation. Finally, she got to the new business portion of the agenda. "Does anyone have any new business?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I stood up. "I do," I said. Every head in the room turned toward me. Karen's smile tightened. "Mr. Travis, I'm surprised to see you here. I would think you'd be busy dealing with your various property issues." A few of her cronies on the board chuckled. "I'm here to talk about property issues, Karen," I said, walking toward the front of the room. "Specifically my property and the easement you've been trying to force through it." Lisa was right behind me. She took out her phone, propped it up on the podium, and pressed a button. "For the record," she said in a clear, loud voice, "this meeting is now being live streamed." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face went pale. She leaned toward a microphone she thought was off and hissed, "Delete that feed." The chat exploded. "We heard that." Comments poured in. "Play the blue hands footage. Show the minutes." "That's against the rules," she sputtered. Neighbor Ed stood up from his seat on the board. "Actually, Karen, it's not," he said calmly. "I checked the bylaws. There's nothing prohibiting it." I laid it all out. I started with the blocked driveway and the fabricated fines. Then I told them about the stolen fuel and the severed fence. I played the video from the birdhouse camera on the projector we brought, showing Jerry with his glowing blue hands. The room was silent, captivated. I read Jerry's signed confession out loud, his words echoing in the stunned silence. I explained how Karen had falsified the HOA minutes to authorize a lawsuit against us. Then Lisa put the final slide up on the screen. It was the corporate filing for Oak Ridge Estates, the developer, and next to it, the wedding announcement from the old newspaper, both bearing the name Karen Miller. "The developer who stands to make millions from this easement," I said, my voice ringing with clarity, "is a shell company owned and operated by one person, your HOA president." "Karen Tyson," the room erupted. People were shouting, pointing at Karen, who looked like a cornered animal. She tried to deny it, to shout over the noise, calling it all lies and slander. But then other people started to stand up. The woman with the petunias spoke, her voice trembling with anger about how Karen had harassed her for months. The man with the swing set stood up and described how Karen had threatened to put a lien on his house. One by one, a dozen people who had been bullied and intimidated by her found their voice. It was a tidal wave of anger, and Karen was drowning in it. She saw it was over. Her power, built on fear and deception, was evaporating before her very eyes. As the chaos reached its peak, just as she was trying to gather her things and flee the podium, the main doors of the clubhouse swung open with a loud bang. The whole room went silent. Standing in the doorway, his face set like granite, was Sheriff Miller. Sheriff Miller wasn't alone. He had 2 deputies with him. They didn't rush in. They just stood there for a moment, letting the silence in the room deepen. Every eye was on them, then on Karen. You could hear the AC hum. My chest felt like a gate strained by wind. She was frozen behind the podium, her face a mask of disbelief and panic. The sheriff took a slow walk to the front of the room, his boots making a heavy, deliberate sound on the tile floor. He held up a thick stack of papers. "Karen Tyson," he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "I have a warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp went through the crowd. He continued, listing the charges as if reading from a list: conspiracy to commit grand theft, felony vandalism, insurance fraud related to the vehicle she reported damaged in a ditch, and racketeering for using the Briarwood Homeowners Association as a criminal enterprise to defraud its members and enrich herself. It was that last charge, racketeering, that seemed to finally break her. The blood drained from her face. This wasn't about fines and easements anymore. This was serious prison time. She didn't scream or cry. She did what cowards always do when they are truly cornered. She ran. She shoved past one of her board members, knocking over a pitcher of water, and bolted for the side exit. The deputies moved to intercept her, but she was fast, fueled by pure panic. She burst out into the parking lot. We all rushed to the windows to watch. Her large white vehicle, the same one, freshly repaired and gleaming under the parking lot lights, was right by the door. She fumbled with her keys, finally got the door open, and threw herself inside. The engine roared to life. She slammed the vehicle into reverse, peeling out of the parking spot with a squeal of tires, and then threw it into drive. She was aiming for the main exit, for the freedom of the open road. But she was panicked, not thinking clearly. A deputy had moved his patrol car to partially block the exit. Karen swerved violently to avoid it, too violently. Her front tires went off the pavement and onto the manicured, well-watered grass of the clubhouse lawn. The grass was wet, slick as ice. The large vehicle lost all traction. It began to slide, a slow, inevitable, almost comical skid. It slid across the lawn, gaining a little speed as it went down the slight incline, heading directly for the road and for the drainage ditch that ran alongside it. Perfect, poetic, inescapable. With a final heavy crunch of metal and plastic, the front end of Karen Tyson's luxury vehicle plunged for the second and final time into the exact same ditch I had so gently placed it in weeks before. It came to rest at the exact same angle, nose down in the mud, tail up in the air. The engine sputtered and died. Silence. Then the parking lot was filled with flashing red and blue lights. The deputies didn't have to chase her. They just calmly walked over to the driver's side door, opened it and helped a dazed and muddy Karen Tyson out of the car and into a pair of handcuffs. The reign of the HOA queen was officially over. She had quite literally driven herself right back into the hole she had dug. In the weeks that followed, the whole rotten structure Karen built came apart, board by board. Jerry cooperated first. He met with the prosecutor, hands scrubbed raw like he could wash off the blue. He accepted a plea deal and told the truth. The two pond divers capitulated next. Turns out cold water and burner phones don't make good alibis. Those phones were treasure. Text messages, schedules, payment screenshots. Karen's consulting looked a lot like paying herself with her maiden name and an extra zero. Her attorney tried the usual tactics: delay, deny, intimidate. But the stack of proof kept growing. Birdhouse cameras, falsified minutes, the shell company trail, even her own emails where she copied insurance and hinted her vehicle was likely a total loss. When the district attorney added racketeering, the room went quiet. That word changes everything. Her counsel leaned close, spoke in hushed tones, and a proud face finally cracked. She accepted a plea deal, not out of grace, out of calculation. The board she ruled like a tiny kingdom, gone in a week. Resignations came in a sad little flood. Neighbor Ed, steady as a fence post, took the interim president position and called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. People filled every chair and then the aisles. He read the agenda, cleared his throat, and said the line we all needed. Motion to void every fine issued under the prior board for the last 2 years. The chorus of ayes hit the ceiling. Folks cried. Folks hugged. I just let my shoulders drop and breathed like a man who'd been holding a hay bale above his head for months. The easement died where it stood. Oak Ridge Estates dissolved in the plea agreement. The outside developer who had eyed my pasture backed away like a stray dog that finally met resistance. The right-of-way stayed what it had always been: cattle path, deer track, my land. Nothing fancy, just mine. Life slid back into its groove. Feed fences, sleep. Evenings with Lisa on the porch counting bats and blessings. The corn went green, then gold, then harvested. Trucked out with that sweet dust that coats your teeth and makes you think of next year. Winter put a soft blanket on the fields. The quiet came back, deeper than before, like the ground itself exhaled. One cold afternoon I cleaned the barn, sorting bolts by coffee can and stories by weight. A box from the clubhouse sat by the door, full of paper remnants. Old agendas, a crooked trophy for best yard, some pens that never wrote. At the bottom was a bent nameplate caked in dried mud. "Call President." I laughed out loud. I washed the mud but left the bend. The bend was the truth. I set it on the bench and asked myself the question that kept prowling the edges of my mind. How far is too far?
Is it baiting a thief with dye?
Chasing a truck with a tractor? Live streaming a lie until it can't breathe? I turned the plate in my hands and saw the answer in the ripples. It's too far when you start the fight. When you covet what isn't yours, when you strike first and call it order. I didn't start this. I finished it. Lisa came in, cheeks pink from the air. "You keeping that?" she asked. "Absolutely," I said. I took a hammer and one substantial nail and walked to the large center beam. The barn wood is older than me and most of my mistakes. I drove the nail home and hung the plate at eye level where the morning light can find it. It fit there like a knot in the grain. We stood a while. The wind fussed at the door. Somewhere a calf called and a hen bragged about nothing. Lisa slid her hand into mine. "What's it say to you?" she asked. I smiled. "It says we don't start trouble here." I looked toward the drive, clean and quiet. "Around here, if you block a driveway, you meet a ditch." I squeezed her hand. "And if you try to take what's ours, you meet us." I shut off the lights. The plate shone a little in the last of the sun, a small crooked moon on old wood. We latched the door. The barn held our tools, our stories, and one loud reminder. On this farm, we mind our business until someone decides to make their business ours. Then we mind it with wits, with proof, and if we must, with 12 tons of green steel.